When most people hear someone like me mention the doctrine of the Trinity, their eyes immediately glaze over and they prepare themselves to be bored to death or just plain confused. I'll be honest with you, today's discussion of H. Richard Niebuhr's Christ and Culture is far and away the most difficult to explain without getting tied up in deep and technical theological issues. This is the fourth of the polarities Niebuhr uses to put together his typology of Christians and Christian groups and how they come at the problem of Christ and culture. And if it were just a matter of their interpretations of the Trinity, it would be pretty straightforward. But it's not just about how they picture the Trinity. It's about how Trinitarian thinking influences how each one envisions the relationship between nature and the issue of the redemption won for us in Jesus Christ. With that thoroughly confusing introduction, let me do my best to make this issue clear. Bear with me. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, June 14th, 2024. The primary way we talk about the Trinity in the church is to talk about the three persons of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The virtue of this kind of language is that we're talking about persons with whom we can have a relationship. But we can also talk about the Trinity in terms of functions. The current favorite way to talk about the Trinity from this perspective is to talk about God as creator, redeemer, and sustainer. The only problem with this language is that it tends to assign different tasks to the different persons of the Trinity. We equate the Father with the creator, the Son with the redeemer, and the Holy Spirit with the sustainer. And while there is some merit and truth in this, the real truth is that all three persons of the Trinity are all part of all three of these functions. For example, we talk about Jesus Christ as the one for whom and through whom creation came into being, and we talk about the Spirit of God moving over the primordial waters in creation. Nevertheless, what Niebuhr wants to say about the various approaches to the Christ culture problem makes more sense if we talk about the works of God, and especially the relationship between creation and redemption. Let's begin with what the doctrine of the Trinity is all about. It is a way to hold together two seemingly incompatible truths. On the one hand, we believe that God is one, and on the other hand, we believe that Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit are part of God. But beneath this idea lurks the reality that God's works, while many, are essentially one. In this understanding, the work of creation cannot be fully separated from the work of redemption. The God of nature is also the God of grace. But the different types of Christianity that Niebuhr identifies understand this relationship in vastly different ways. For most of the Christian world, and I count us in this broad middle, the God whom we meet in creation is also the God whose grace redeems and sustains the whole of creation, not condemning the world that he created. This is the theology that you are familiar with. But for the churches on each extreme, what Niebuhr calls the Christ against culture wing and the Christ of culture wing, they have a hard time holding these realities together. For the Christ against culture end of the spectrum, or the radical Christians who reject culture as lying outside the realm of God's redemption, it is difficult to reconcile how culture can be understood as part of God's creation. They understand Christ not as Redeemer of fallen creation, but as the founder and king of a new society, separate and apart from the rest of creation. By contrast, the Christ of culture wing has a hard time with the idea of a fallen creation. And if creation is not fallen, it's hard to talk about Christ as Redeemer. Christ, in this case, becomes the great moral teacher, but little can be said of his work of salvation. If these two extremes sound, well, extreme, it's because in all likelihood you've been raised and nourished in a more orthodox theology, one that understands that God created all things, including culture, and that God's ongoing care and concern for creation as a whole leads to a concern for the redemption of creation, including culture. the center of Christianity, in other words, holds the Trinity and the works of the Trinity together. When we begin to look at Niebuhr's 5 types, we'll see how their understandings of the Trinity line up with other theological issues that Niebuhr raises and that we've already talked about. So tomorrow and Monday I'll be out of pocket, and I'll simply post a couple of devotionals from the archives. Then on Tuesday next week, we'll begin our in-depth look at each of Niebuhr's 5 types. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.